Poland just crossed $1 trillion in GDP. It passed economic powerhouse Switzerland and entered the world's top 20 largest economies. And it's growing rapidly, with a recorded economic growth of 3.6% last year. Today, Poland is a high-income, industrialized economy, but this wasn't always the case. In 1989, Poland's GDP per capita was only $1,700. Inflation was running at 600%, and the currency, the Polish zloty, was worth almost nothing. At the same time, Germany, Poland's neighbor, was the undisputed engine of Europe, the largest economy on the continent, the industrial backbone, and the country the whole bloc ran through. The gap between them was enormous, but that's changing fast. In 2000, Germany's economy was roughly 11 times the size of Poland's. By 2010, 7 times. Today, it's closer to 4.5 times, and it's narrowing every year. And while Poland's rise sounds like good news for Europe on the surface, it could be bad news for its neighbor to the west, Germany. Because Germany has spent the last decades as the EU's dominant economic and political force. Poland's trajectory puts that dominance under pressure. How exactly? To show you that, we have to go back to the year the Berlin Wall fell and Poland finally got its freedom. It's 1989. The Warsaw Pact collapsed, and with it, the Soviet grip on Eastern Europe. Countries like Poland got their freedom back. But freedom didn't come with a ready-made economy. Decades of communism had built every system in the country around central planning. To shift toward a market economy meant tearing out the foundation and replacing it while the building was still standing. The government's answer was a plan named after the finance minister who designed it, Leszek Balcerowicz. It meant overnight liberalization, privatizing state firms, and abolishing price controls. Let the market take over fast before the political window closed. Unemployment spiked, whole industries collapsed, but by 1992, growth had already returned, faster than anyone predicted. Poland was moving while its neighbors were still debating. From 1989 to 2018, Poland's GDP grew by 826%, the highest in Europe over that period, ahead of Ireland and Slovakia. Uninterrupted growth for over 30 years. Only Australia beats that record globally. EU membership arrived in 2004, and Poland deployed it at scale. Between accession and 2024, Poland received a net 160 billion euros in EU structural funds, more than any other member state. Roads, railways, universities, factories. The infrastructure gap that had separated Warsaw from Western Europe for decades got filled in fast, and the investment kept compounding. The first major test came in 2008. While the EU as a whole contracted 4.5%, Poland's economy grew 1.6%. A large domestic consumer market, worth roughly 61% of GDP, meant Poland wasn't fully exposed when export demand collapsed across Europe. Germany and France had no equivalent buffer. In 1995, Poland's GDP per capita, adjusted for cost of living, sat at 44% of the EU average. By 2025, it reached 81%, the highest Poland has ever recorded. It has now overtaken Spain on that measure. Prime Minister Tusk described it as entering the European economic elite. It's what the World Bank calls the European tiger effect. They built the courts and the regulators first. The money only showed up once the floor was level. The workforce that came with it, better educated than young Germans by some measures, at roughly half the wage cost, gave any company moving production to Europe a calculation that closed fast. The growth compounded for 3 decades straight. The Polish Economic Institute calculated that its economy is now 42% larger than it would be if the country had never joined the EU, capturing not just the funds received, but the trade access, the institutional anchoring, and the investor credibility that came with membership. But what Poland built wasn't only about closing a historical gap. It was about what was happening on the other side of the border while Warsaw was compounding those gains. Germany's problems didn't arrive in a single quarter. They built up across a decade of structural decisions that looked defensible at the time and turned catastrophic together. When Russia cut off gas supplies after the invasion of Ukraine, energy costs for German industry tripled. The chemical sector, the steel sector, the auto sector, the 3 pillars of German manufacturing, started relocating or shutting down entirely. BASF moved production to China. Volkswagen announced plant closures on German soil for the first time in its history. These weren't isolated shocks. They were the consequence of an industrial model built on cheap Russian energy that no longer exists. Germany's economy contracted, while Poland's grew 3.6% in 2025. That divergence didn't come from nowhere, and the companies leaving Germany aren't all going to Asia. A significant number are crossing the border. German Mittelstand firms, the small and mid-sized manufacturers that form the backbone of German industrial output, have been relocating production lines into Poland at a pace that accelerated sharply after 2022. Energy costs in Germany ran 3 to 4 times higher than in Poland during the worst of the crisis. For a precision parts manufacturer running energy-intensive equipment, that differential makes the German location unviable. The factory moves, the jobs move with it. As factories in the Ruhr Valley close, new production lines are opening in Poznan. The German output that once showed up in Berlin's GDP now shows up in Warsaw's. Poland moved the opposite direction. Industrial output sits at 28.7% of GDP, one of the highest in the EU, while manufacturing employs roughly 30% of the workforce. This isn't just about moving assembly lines. Poland has quietly secured a grip on 3 specific materials that the rest of Europe's defense industry can't function without. Poland's industrial weight is anchored in raw materials. It's the world's 5th largest silver producer, 13th largest copper producer, and 3rd largest producer of rhenium, a rare metal used in jet engines and high-temperature industrial equipment that sits inside the supply chains of advanced aerospace and defense manufacturing. Poland doesn't just participate in global supply chains. In specific categories, it controls choke points. Foreign investment followed the logic. IBM, Google, Amazon, and a long list of major automotive suppliers all set up significant operations in Poland over the last decade. The reasoning is straightforward. When a company shifts production out of China, a factory in Poland can reach the most densely populated parts of Europe in 24 hours, the whole continent in 48. No other large European economy at Poland's cost structure offers that geography. But the geography is only half of the calculation. The actual products are changing. Poland is no longer primarily assembling components for factories further west. It's manufacturing EV batteries, advanced electronics, and vehicle parts that sit higher on the value chain. Economists in Poznan describe this as climbing the ladder of added value, moving from supplier to producer, from producer toward innovator. Germany remains Poland's largest trading partner, absorbing 27.8% of Polish exports. But the direction of that relationship is changing. Poland used to depend on German demand. Increasingly, German manufacturers depend on Polish production. The headline comparison captures the scale of the divergence plainly. Poland's nominal GDP has risen 500% since 2000. Germany's has grown roughly 60% over the same period. The gap between Warsaw and Berlin is still large. Poland's total GDP sits at roughly 1/5 of Germany's. But the direction of travel has held steady for 25 years, and nothing in Germany's current position suggests a reversal is coming. But the story most people are missing isn't just economic. Poland is making a bet on energy and military power that could permanently shift its weight inside the EU. For most of Europe, the moment Russia cut off gas in 2022 was a crisis nobody had planned for. For Poland, it was the moment a plan already years in motion got validated. Poland's exit from Russian gas didn't start with the invasion. It started with infrastructure decisions made a decade earlier, when Warsaw decided that depending on a single supplier for a critical input was a liability it couldn't carry. The Baltic Pipe opened in September 2022, carrying Norwegian gas through Denmark directly into Poland, 10 billion cubic meters of capacity per year. Poland had been formally cut off from Russian supplies in April 2022, months before that pipeline reached full commission, and the lights stayed on. Germany, by contrast, was still completing Nord Stream 2 when Russian tanks crossed the Ukrainian border, then spent 2 years scrambling to replace supply it had deliberately deepened its dependence on. An LNG terminal at Świnoujście on the Baltic coast adds a second important route that doesn't touch any pipeline at all. Nearly all of Poland's gas once came from Russia. Today, that figure is 0. The transition didn't happen through market forces or lucky timing. Warsaw treated energy independence as a strategic priority long before the rest of the bloc. The next phase is nuclear. In December 2025, the EU approved 14.2 billion euros in state aid for Poland's first nuclear power plant, to be built on the Baltic coast by Westinghouse and Bechtel. Coal still generates over 57% of Poland's electricity, the highest share in the EU. The nuclear plant won't come online until the mid-2030s, but the direction of the build-out is fixed, and the financing is secured. Poland is constructing generation capacity designed to run its economy without Russian gas and without the carbon costs that will compound steadily for every country still burning fossil fuels at scale. Then there's the military spending, and this is where the numbers stop being comparable to anything else in Europe. Poland now spends 4.3% of GDP on defense, the highest proportion in the entire NATO alliance, higher than the United States, higher than the United Kingdom. France and Germany combined as a share of their respective economies still don't match what Warsaw is committing. In absolute terms, Poland's defense budget reached an estimated $50 billion in 2025, with a total investment program mapped out at $70 billion, the largest military buildup in Polish history. Poland secured $2.4 billion in K9 Thunder howitzers from South Korea, with a second $2.6 billion contract following. These defense contracts are converting directly into domestic manufacturing capacity, with K9PL production launching in 2026. This $70 billion buildup gives Warsaw leverage in Brussels. Poland is already using it to challenge standard EU protocols. All of this weight, economic, industrial, energetic, military, it's accumulating inside an institution that runs on votes, vetoes, and negotiating leverage. Poland is learning how to use all three. By nominal GDP, Poland is the EU's 6th largest economy. By purchasing power, 5th. It's the single largest recipient of EU structural funds in the bloc's history, having pulled in a net 160 billion euros between 2004 and 2024. That combination used to mean Warsaw did what Brussels asked. That dynamic has shifted. Poland's 38 million people give it one of the larger voting blocs in the European Council. Warsaw has already shown it will deploy that weight. It blocked migration quota proposals, challenged EU legal primacy during the rule of law standoff, and refused to move on energy policy timelines that didn't suit its coal-dependent grid. When Brussels froze funds, Poland held its position for years before a negotiated outcome unlocked 137 billion euros in cohesion and recovery funds in February 2024, the largest single release of EU funds in the bloc's history. Two parties with real leverage on both sides reached a deal. That's not a subordinate relationship. Poland also secured the largest national allocation under the EU's Safe Defence Loan Programme, 44 billion euros, before a domestic political dispute between the Prime Minister and the President blocked access. The standoff is unresolved, but even the dispute reveals something. No country that sat at the margins of European defence architecture would have been allocated 44 billion euros to begin with. The external signals point the same direction. The US ambassador to Poland described the country as Europe's new great power and a model Europe must follow. The Trump administration invited Poland to the G20 as a guest nation. In 1995, the phrase Europe's new great power would have sounded absurd. Today, the data supports it. For most of the post-Cold War era, the geopolitical center of Europe ran through Berlin. Washington's first call in a European crisis went to Germany. EU fiscal policy moved when Germany approved it. Defense architecture in the East was built around German political restraint. That center is shifting. Poland is building the largest army in the EU by headcount, spending more on defense as a share of GDP than any NATO member, including the United States, and sitting on the largest military investment program in its history. At the same time, it's the EU's biggest net recipient of structural funds, the 6th largest economy by nominal GDP, and the country the US is now treating as its primary land power partner on NATO's eastern flank. The political and economic influence once concentrated in Berlin is shifting. While the shift is not total, the trajectory has remained consistent for over 10 years. Whether Poland sustains this pace depends on managing three simultaneous demands. Public debt is projected to reach 69% of GDP by 2027. The $70 billion military buildup must run parallel to industrial repositioning and a complete energy transition off coal. These aren't sequential projects, they're running at the same time, and they compete for capital, political will, and credibility. Poland has accelerated fast enough to challenge Germany's dominance. Whether it can manage its own growth is the question the next decade will answer.